Hi there, Michael here. Today we are going to check out a new plugin from Plugin Alliance called Here's Perfection. This plugin promises personalized correction for truly accurate monitoring. What it does is it measures your hearing profile and then corrects the sound much like a hearing aid. And this can be extremely helpful if your hearing is no longer as good as it used to be. I know that certainly mine needs a little bit of help. I recently did another review of a similar plugin called Aria Studio from Altitude Audio. So what I want to do today is look at the new Here's plugin and compare my impressions with Aria Studio so that if you are interested in purchasing either one of these, you can make a better informed decision. In this video, I'm not going to go into the details about the Aria Studio plugin. I have a separate video on that, and I'm going to leave a link to that in the description below. If you're interested, I recommend that you check that out. Before we jump into the review, a quick reminder that you can support this channel through Patreon. I've recently simplified my Patreon tiers, so if you have not looked at that for a while, I recommend checking that out. Link is in the description. And as always, if you find value in my videos, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I publish weekly videos on all things immersive and spatial audio. And with that being said, let's open up Here's Perfection. So I've opened up my Digital Audio Workstation and I've loaded in both plugins for demonstration purposes. Now obviously this is not something that you would normally do. You would only load in one and not both. Makes no sense to have both on there, but this once again is just for demonstration purposes. On the left side we have Altitude Audio's Aria Studio. On the right side we have Here's Perfection from Plugin Alliance. Now in both cases I loaded in the hearing profile, my personal hearing profile after going through the hearing tests in both plugins. And at first glance, these seem to be different. However, they're actually fairly similar. So if we look at the Aria Studio plugin, we first of all see that there's a lot more detail here. But if I smooth it out, you actually see that they are very similar. So there's this bump here at 2 kilohertz, which also appears here in the Here's plugin. And then there's another little bump here around 3, 4, 5 kilohertz that also appears here. And the only difference is that the Aria Studio plugin measures frequencies above 10 kilohertz. So I have this huge bump here that is indicating that I have hearing loss in the higher frequencies. In reality, I can't really hear anything above 12.5 kilohertz anymore. Now, the fact that the Aria Studio plugin can measure frequencies at that frequency range can be considered an advantage or a disadvantage depending on your personal situation. In my particular case, it's more of a disadvantage because I can't hear those frequencies anyway. So no matter how much you correct that, it's not going to have an effect on me. I'm not going to hear that. And if I look at that frequency correction, the one thing that I always think is that seems to put too much pressure on my headphones at a frequency range that is useless for me anyway. Now, you can obviously kind of correct it a little so I can bring that down, but it's not going to disappear completely. So this huge bump is going to stay there. And it's not going to make any difference. So while kind of, yes, for some people this might be important to also correct the frequencies at these higher levels, I'm actually more happy with the way the Here's plugin does it. I don't need any correction at the higher frequencies because once again, I can't hear those anyway. The other thing that I wanted to point out when comparing these two plugins is that very obviously the Aria Studio plugin from Altitude Audio has a lot more features and a lot more things that you can adjust. There are a lot more parameters that you can choose, whereas the Here's plugin from Plugin Alliance is very simple. It only has a couple of features. The features that it has is primarily you can change the gain. You can do that for both, or you can do that independently for left and right. And you can also change the scale of the hearing correction. So you can push that if you want to, or you can reduce that. And once again, you can do that independently for the left side and the right side if that is something you want to do. Usually what I do is that I I change the scale to around 80%. And the reason for that is that if you have a hearing loss and you correct that hearing loss exactly in order to give you perfect hearing, the brain is already adjusted to some hearing loss. So if you actually correct that by 100%, it's going to feel off. So for me personally, usually I get the best impression if I set that to around 80%. That kind of corrects the hearing, but not to the point where it feels unnatural. Now, when you do a hearing test with the Here's Perfection plugin, you're actually using your standard studio headphones. And in my particular case, I use the Sony headphones. This is why my profile here is called Sony. And that means that you're sort of baking in the frequency response of your headphones into the frequency correction for your hearing profile. Now, I first thought that's going to make a huge difference, but it ended up not really doing that. It's actually, as you can see, the hearing profiles are very, very similar. So it's very, very true to my actual hearing loss profile. And my feeling is that it's primarily because most of the headphones that you would use in a studio environment are fairly neutral in the mid-range. So it's not going to make a huge difference which headphone you're going to use. But once again, you might want to make a profile for each headphone that you use in the studio in order to make that as accurate as possible. The hearing test in the Hears Perfection plugin is very, very simple. So let me just demonstrate that. And for that purpose, let me maybe close the Altitude plugin and disable that here. So just to be safe. And then all I really need to do is need to start the test. As soon as I start the test, it gives me a couple of instructions. This test will take around 5 minutes. Honestly, it's not going to take 5 minutes. I usually kind of complete it in 1 to 2 minutes. And make sure your environment is quiet and free from distraction, obviously. And then let's go to next. And then it's asking me for the setup. I can try out the test tone. And yeah, that's a little bit creepy, but kind of it's a test tone. What can I do? And then essentially you simply start the test. And what will happen is that it will go through a range of frequencies and play them at different levels. And you need to tell the system when you stop hearing those. So let's just kind of go through a couple so that we see how that works. Now it's going to start at the left ear in the lower frequencies. So it's going to ask me, do you hear that sound? So I say yes, 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 no. And then it goes up. Next one, yes, 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 no. And then you go through everything. And it goes from left, lower frequencies, to right, higher frequencies. Now, when I first went through that, and let me just turn it off. I'm going to cancel that here. Yes, I want to cancel the test. Now, when I did my first hearing test with the Hears plugin, I felt that this predictability might be a disadvantage because after all, you know what's coming. So you're starting on the left ear with the lower frequencies, and then you're going up the frequencies. And once you're at the highest frequency, you switch over to the right ear, and then you do the same thing again. So it becomes very predictable. If you've ever done a hearing test in an audiologist's office, you know that the unpredictability of the signals that you get is actually part of the test. However, as it turns out, this is not the case. So the results that I got with the Hears Perfection plugin are surprisingly accurate and are very, very similar to my professional hearing profile that I got in the audiologist's office. So this is actually kind of a good way to go, I think. And they decided to create a test that is at the same time accurate, but also very simple to do. Does not have a lot of complications that you need to go through. There's no additional application you need to run. There's nothing that you need to download from anywhere. You just do that within the plugin. It takes 1 to 2 minutes, and then you're essentially done. So what's my final verdict of the Hears Perfection plugin, and how does it compare to the Aria Studio plugin from Altitude Audio? Well, first of all, I really like the simplicity of the Hears plugin. There's one thing it is supposed to do, and it does it really well. The hearing test is included in the plugin itself, which is very convenient. And while the fact that it does not rely on calibrated headphones means that the measurements it creates are not as accurate as the ones in the Aria Studio plugin, I did not really hear a huge amount of difference in the correction. In fact, one could argue that the approach the Hears plugin takes is better because it allows you to create hearing profiles for each of the headphones you have, instead of generating one general purpose profile. In theory, a profile the Hears plugin creates incorporates a correction of the headphones you use to generate the profile. It does not measure what you hear, it actually measures what you hear through that particular headphone. By contrast, the Aria Studio plugin takes the measurements with a calibrated headphone, so you need to own one of the headphones they list on their site for this purpose. This has the advantage that its profiles can apply to any listening environment, and as I mentioned in my review of the Aria Studio, these measurements are actually surprisingly accurate. At least in my case, they were extremely close to what my audiologist measured. But that also means that the measurement process is more complicated. It requires you to measure through a separate application on your smartphone and then transfer the measurement profile over to your studio environment. Not a huge hassle, but certainly something that takes a bit of time. Another important difference is that the Aria Studio plugin measures a wider range of frequencies, whereas the Hears plugin sticks to the frequencies usually measured by audiologists, and that is somewhat limited. This seems to be a disadvantage of the Hears plugin at first, but in my testing I actually ended up preferring that. The measurements taken by the ARIA Studio plugin in the higher end frequencies above 10 kHz were not really useful for me, and I actually ended up cutting those out manually. First, they were relatively inaccurate. I'm assuming that is because headphones in general tend to be a little bit all over the place in the higher frequencies. And then if you're like me and you are facing the fact that your hearing disappears completely in the higher frequencies, correction is not going to help you anyway. So I ended up having this huge frequency bump in the higher frequencies that I was not able to hear regardless. So in conclusion, I think if you're looking for a hearing loss correction plugin, both plugins are solid choices. The ARIA Studio plugin uses a more accurate measurement approach while sacrificing some usability. It also has additional options for fine-tuning the results that the HEARS plugin does not have. The HEARS plugin, on the other hand, is simple, gets the job done, and quite frankly also less expensive. It also has the more professional user interface and overall just feels a bit more professional. Personally, I will most likely rely more on the HEARS plugin, although I will keep both plugins on my system. Well, that's everything for today. I would be interested to hear your opinions. Are you using either one of those plugins? What do you like and dislike? Drop your opinions in the comments or join our free Discord server. The invite link is in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all things Dolby Atmos and immersive audio. There is some really cool stuff coming next week. Until then, thanks for watching and I'll see you all in the next video.